They're being called the Four Eyes towards an innovative, invigorated, interconnected and inclusive world economy. That's the motto of the 2016 G20 Summit in Hangzhou. This marks the first time China has hosted the annual summit. For what to expect in the coming days, we have CCTV's Yuting joining us from the G20 Summit in Hangzhou. Thanks so much for joining us. This is obviously the first time China is hosting the G20. What are the major topics on the agenda?
Yes, Nathan, as you said, that this is the first time China hosts the G20 Summit. And you know that the theme of the 2016 G20 Summit is the innovative, invigorated, interconnected and inclusive world economy. And in the following days, the G20 members, together with China, will be actively engaged in the discussions such as how to maintain the sustainable, strong and balanced growth of the world economy. And you know that the turmoil in the international financial markets in the 2015 just indicates that there are lots of problems need to be solved. And especially, you know, that the traditional structural the policies is not a very good term for the long-term resolve of the financial crisis and also to boost the world economy. So many more innovative policies such as the fiscal policy, monetary policy, and also the structural policy individually and collectively are needed urgently to improve the growth model and to improve the world economy. So in the following days, another highlight is that China, together with other G20 members, will also discuss the UN Sustainable Development Agenda. And that agenda will just to ensure the consensus among lots of G20 member countries to make the elimination of the extreme poverty and also to combat climate change and working together towards the low carbon economy and the growth model. So that will be a very important meeting that all the nations are very closely following. Nathan.
So you're saying inclusive is one of the words, and as the world's largest developing economy, China, of course, is playing an important role in the growth of emerging markets and also contributing to the 21st century idea of a new way of global economic governance, correct?
Yes, Nathan, as you said, China will play an active role in boosting the world economy and to enhance the global economic governance system. And you know that as China just taken the presidency of the G20, the country have already maintained the International Financial Architecture Working Group. And that working group have been making lots of efforts to improve the effectiveness of the model of the economy. And also very important is that, as you know, that during the press conference, the deputy governor of the PBOC, that is the People's Bank of China, have already highlighted the importance of expanding the, it's very significant of expanding the SDR currency basket and the IMF's, the special drawing rights basket. And the RMB will be included in the SDR basket, the currency basket, on October the 1st. So that will be very significant. That means China will actively engage in the global economy and to play a bigger role in the global economic governance system. Nathan?
Yuting right there where the action will be all weekend in Hangzhou. Thanks so much. And joining us from Shanghai now is Kevin Rudd, former Prime Minister of Australia. He also served as that country's foreign minister and is now the president of the Asia Society Policy Institute and also a very good friend of CCTV. Thanks so much for coming back on, Mr. Rudd. You are considered one of the architects, the founders of the G20. It was initially created to tackle a financial crisis like these groupings often are. But this year, obviously looking forward as well. What strikes you about the agenda in Hangzhou?
Well, let me correct you. I'm one of the co-founders. There were many of us back in 2008 of the G20. And we did so in response to the depths of the financial crisis back then. Turning to your question about the agenda for Hangzhou, I think the principal item on the agenda in the minds of heads of government will be how do we go about restoring long-term, sustainable, balanced economic growth to the world. Because the truth is we've had suboptimal growth now for about 7 years. And trade in particular is beginning to lag badly. And so this problem of slow growth, I think, will be foremost in the minds of G20 leaders and how to make a real difference from their meeting here in China.
We have a slogan for the summit which has the 4 I's in it, as we were just talking to Yuting, our reporter, towards an innovative, invigorated, interconnected and inclusive world economy. What does that mean in terms of policies?
Well, on the innovation front, I think the Chinese government has been working for some time to lift its own game in this area. The Chinese quite rightly have recognised that this has not been a strength of China's economy in the past, and they've sought to make a quantum leap forward in making the country more driven by scientific innovation and technological development. As a driver of new economic activity, therefore, all eyes will be focused on what Chinese leader Xi Jinping has to say in Hangzhou about new directions for the country on that score. I think the other point to emphasize about China's so-called 4 I's is the last one too, which is inclusive growth. What do we mean by that? I think right across the world we're beginning to see the effect of automation, the introduction of artificial intelligence, whether it's in cars which drive themselves, or whether it's in new technologies on production lines, and also in the services sector, we're beginning to see evidence of industries transforming into jobs-free growth, or growth in industries which has much less labour concentration than the past. This is creating a structural problem for long-term employment. So inclusive growth means how do you bring the rest of the country along with you, rather than leaving them as a group of people who don't benefit from the globalization process. I think, therefore, the inclusive growth component of China's motto for this G20 summit in Hangzhou is an important one.
And inclusion also means countries that aren't normally part of a G7 process as well. The G20, of course, is a wider grouping numerically, but a lot of observers and countries being invited into the process. I'm talking about Chad, Kazakhstan, Laos, Egypt and others. Oh, and remember, we also have to remember that China, even though you're in Shanghai, is essentially a developing economy still. What does that mix provide for the G20 in this setting?
Well, it's perfectly natural for China, given its historical relationship with the G77 and the group of developing countries, which goes back decades now, to define inclusive growth as meaning those countries and those economies as well, not just the developed West and not just the major economic powerhouses of East Asia. And I think that's an important step in the direction of inclusion. When I referred before to inclusiveness, I think it happens at 2 levels. One within economies where a number of people get left behind by the economic transformation process, particularly driven by automation and new technological innovation. But between countries, you also see this problem of various countries being left behind. Therefore, the concept of inclusiveness deals with groups both within countries and countries themselves, which are not first and foremost in recent economic development history. So I think what China is seeking to do is to plug into those 2 groups at home and abroad and have a strong message and substance for both of them.
So all this need for global growth also has a backdrop, of course, with climate change and being able to having to tackle climate change. Greening the economy is another one of the themes, and also the inclusion of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals for 2030, which, as you know, went on after the Millennium Development Goals, poverty reduction targets. How is this all going to come together, as well as charting a course for growth?
I think it's very important we stand back from the detail for one moment and ask ourselves, what's contributing to economic growth at the present and what's not? And furthermore, what could contribute further in the future? If you go through the classic toolbox available to economies, I think monetary policy has been tried, but frankly, it's run out of steam because interest rates are now at record lows around the world. Fiscal policy, problem, because most countries have run up significant deficit and debts or sovereign debts. Thirdly, you've seen quantitative easing applied in Japan and the United States and the European Union, But frankly, there's a limit to how far that can go as well. So that brings us on to the question of what actually can drive the global economy in the future. One is the resuscitation of global trade. Here the numbers have been discouraging in recent years. Historically, trade has been at a level of about 2 to 3 times that of the standard global economic growth rate, and now it's either just equal to that rate or even lagging behind. So unplugging the arteries of global trade by getting the Doha round done and advancing other free trade agreements around the world, I think is core business. The other thing I would say is this: new drivers of economic growth also lie in infrastructure, and ensuring that investment flows to infrastructure, such as the Chinese are trying to do with the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, I think is the right step forward. But for the Sustainable Development Goals, for the entire UN community, you need to do that with the delivery of finance, both public and private, to infrastructure development across the world, which makes the Sustainable Development Goals possible. I think that's another key area of growth. And I think if we see a focus on trade, we see a focus on infrastructure investment, as well as the new areas of investment, such as green finance, then I think we're starting to construct new pillars of growth for the future.
How does the G20's agenda fit in with China's national strategy? You brought up infrastructure. Obviously, I'm thinking about the One Belt, One Road initiative and obviously development throughout Asia and beyond. Is that somehow dovetailing into this meeting?
Well, China's own current development strategy was, of course, outlined in the most recent 5-year plan, but anchored also into the decision on new economic direction outlined by the Chinese Communist Party and by the government in 2014. And what that seeks to do is to, of course, develop consumption within the Chinese economy, given the important role which private domestic consumption plays in this country for the future. But I think there's a second element to China's growth strategy still, and that is when you still have 100 million or so people in China living in poverty, making it still an emerging economy, and the government's determination to lift them out of poverty, there's still an infrastructure task to be undertaken. I think the commonality, therefore, lies between China's historical experience of infrastructure investment, which has been so important to the economic story of China for the last 35 years, but also the investment which still must come in order to make a difference for those remaining people. And that dovetails with the infrastructure investment agenda for the rest of the world as well. If there's a second parallel, of course it lies in innovation. China has placed a huge emphasis under Premier Li Keqiang on the country's ability to lift the extent to which global productivity, or should I say national productivity in China, is boosted by innovation. It's one of the core drivers of productivity growth. And that, I think, is the parallel message which the Chinese are seeking to deliver internationally as well. Hence the reason why innovation is the first of Xi Jinping's 4 I's for this coming motto for the G20 Summit in Hangzhou.
And we will be keeping our eyes on all the developments in Hangzhou. Kevin Rudd, former Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Australia, thanks so much for joining us